All right. Hello, everyone. I hope you guys are having a great evening. Let's see. It's not quite 7 yet, but I wanted to go ahead and just start chatting while we give everyone a couple more minutes to log on. So welcome. My name is Heather Meadows. I'm a premium tutor here at Appleworth. I've been working for Appleworth, gosh, for about 4 or 5 years now, which seems a little crazy. And one of my favorite things to do is give these presentations because I love sharing all this knowledge with you guys. And kind of making this whole college application test prep process a little bit easier. So tonight we're going to talk about the PSAT. Most of you guys should have started to receive your PSAT scores. If you haven't yet, that's okay. It may take a couple more days. Keep in mind that the PSAT is taken by pretty much every single high school in the US, by pretty much every junior as well. So this is a really big thing for them to grade, so it may take a little bit longer. But this is all still super relevant for you guys. Even if you haven't gotten your scores back. And so I'll say this a couple of times as we go, but there will be a recording of this sent out. So, I am going to go a little fast through the slides because there's a lot of information I want to get to you guys, but there will be a recording. Okay. And so people are still logging on, so I'm going to give them a couple more minutes. Try to hold your questions until the end, and you can use the Q&A function. Many of the questions that we get, typically, I will answer throughout the presentation, and I will try to leave a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. But I recommend you kind of wait until I get through most of it, because most of the questions do end up getting answered in the presentation. So yeah, let's see. Well, it's 7 on my end. Let's go ahead and get started. Anyone else who logs in can always go watch the recording. As a reminder, please try to hold your questions until the end. I may go over it in the presentation, and this will be recorded and it will be sent out. Okay, awesome. Let's go. So the first thing we're going to talk about is your score report itself, right? So this is what you should have gotten an email about, and you can log into your College Board account to see. Like I said, if you haven't gotten one yet, I would go to the College Board website and try to log in, see if maybe the email went to your spam or something. Alternatively, it may take a day or two more to get there. So the score report, right? It's going to give you basic details of your performance. Again, you can log into College Board to see it. You may have gotten an email looking something like this. You can go to psat.org/myscore, I believe. That should still work this year. So let's kind of see what that actual report looks like once you actually get logged in and are looking at it. So the first thing you're going to see is a broad overview, right? You'll see your total score and then some breakdowns. So you have a composite score, which is the same as that total score. So that composite score is out of 1520. And they find that by adding up your EBRW, which is evidence-based reading and writing. That's a combination of the reading and writing sections. The highest you could get out of those is 760. And then both of the math sections are added together to make 760 as well. So be mindful of the percentile as well. So you see the percentile right here underneath that 960 number on the left hand. And keep in mind that all students are compared to juniors, even freshmen, right? And sometimes 8th graders may take this test even too. So for those of you who aren't familiar with percentiles, the way they work is you actually want a bigger number. So if it says you are in the 99th percentile, that means you are doing better than 99% of people. So it's actually kind of opposite from what you would think. So higher is better as far as percentiles goes. But again, remember, if you are like a freshman, sophomore, even 8th grader, you're being compared to juniors. So just keep in mind that may not be super accurate for you. So you may be wondering why it's 1520, right? Well, to kind of clarify that, let's talk about the differences between the PSAT and SAT really quick. We're going to return to the PSAT, but I like to answer this question early on. So for those of you who may have even taken the PSAT 8-9, which is a slightly different test for 8th and 9th graders, your maximum score may actually be 1440. For those who took the PSAT 10 for 10th graders, or the PSAT NMSQT, that's for juniors. We'll talk about what that means in a minute. That is going to cap out at 1520. And the theory that the College Board has here is that the extra content they add, right? So the PSAT is actually a little shorter than a full-length SAT, right? Their idea is that those questions they add to make it longer, to turn it into a real SAT, those are harder questions, and those are 80 points worth of material, essentially. So that's where the difference between the 1520 and the 1600 comes from. So those of you who thought you did really well, you got every question right, and you were confused why you got a 1520, you may have actually gotten every question right. Some of you may have been like freshmen or sophomores, 9th or 10th graders, and you may have taken something that said NMSQT, and that's okay if you did. Some schools are different, so don't worry too much about that. But just keep in mind, this is a little different than the SAT, but for the most part, it's fairly comparable, right? So the idea is that if you are not ready for the SAT, you wouldn't know that 80 points anyway. It's a little strange, but that's what's going on there. For the most part, it's fairly comparable. So the next thing you'll see below is the test scores, right? And so I saw some more people logged in. Just want to pause really quick and say, hi, welcome. My name's Heather Meadows. Just as a reminder, you guys will get a recording of this, so you miss some of it, no worries. And I would recommend you hold your questions until a little bit later. I am going to answer a lot of the most commonly had ones. But you can use the Q&A function if you do have a specific question. And so we're looking at our score report right now, which you can access through the College Board website. So your test scores, right? You would think, didn't we just talk about that? Well, it's very complicated. So you have those scores that are out of 760, right? Those are your section scores. These are your test scores. I know. So those are going to be smaller numbers. So you see these range from 8 to 38. And they get that from taking your raw scores. That's the number you got right in every section, and using some sort of mysterious chart to convert them to these numbers. That chart is created by a statistician on the College Board on their end of it. I don't really know how it works very much, but that's how they actually turn the number you got correct into that other number. They study, what everyone got and things like that. So a little bit of mystery there, but we turned those raw scores into test scores. And then those are used to actually calculate your national merit index. So now we're back to that NMSQT thing, right? So let's talk about that. The NMSQT. So the PSAT is actually not just a practice or preliminary SAT, it is also the qualifying test for the National Merit Scholarship Competition. So this is only for juniors. Only juniors need to worry about this right now, right? The test you just took, if you were a junior, that was your competition test. In 11th grade, students who take the PSAT, that's your competition test. And so that makes you eligible for national merit if you get a high enough score. National Merit Scholarship is a scholarship, right? You can win some money. It also looks really excellent on your resume. There are quite a few levels of it. You can actually win the scholarship. You could be a finalist, you could be a semifinalist, you could even be a commended student. So that's kind of like, just special recognition. There's lots of levels. Only the actual winners receive money, but everyone else, it looks really great on your resume. And we'll talk about some other benefits too. So again, only juniors actually qualify for this. So if you are a junior, the test you just took was your competition entry. If you are a freshman or sophomore or whatever, whenever you are a junior, that test will be your competition entry test. So even if you took the same form, just keep that in mind. So here's what that means, that selection process, right? So of all the top PSAT performing students, they select a certain number, roughly 17,000 or so. And those people are selected as semifinalists. From there, you have to do something else to be considered a finalist. And that's taking a confirming test. So if you were chosen as a semifinalist, you have to go take an actual SAT now. They call it a confirming test just in case something crazy happened, I suppose, to, make sure no one's cheating or anything crazy like that. So you go take a confirming SAT. If you get that high enough, you become a finalist. And then from there, they choose the merit scholars out of the group of finalists. I know it's a little bit weird. So you're a semifinalist, you take a test, see if you're a finalist. If you're a finalist, from there, they select scholars. I'm not sure what happens between those steps. They don't really share that very much, but those merit scholars receive the scholarship itself. And so everyone else, again, it's really, really, really good to have any of these, right? And I will say, to actually win the merit scholarship has just gotten harder and harder and harder in the past few years, the past decade or so. It's pretty rare, right? 0.05% of students actually win it. So definitely keep in mind that all of these levels are great, because finalists and semifinalists can also use that status to earn scholarships, right, from other places. So this is an example, and I'm not 100% sure they are doing this again this year. This is something that has been done in the past, but Auburn University in Alabama in the past has offered a couple $1,000s every year to students who were semifinalists. So things like that are definitely out there, and there are schools that are doing things like that, right? So if you're a semifinalist but don't make it or something like that, don't discount that. That's really great. And even if you're a commended student, that's still awesome, right? That means you just didn't meet the cutoff. But you can still put that on your resume, right? For college, colleges love to see stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. Those are all great to see. And so that's kind of that process for national merit. A little bit weird, I know. And a little bit mysterious sometimes, but definitely something to pursue. So if you saw you were a semifinalist, absolutely pursue doing the rest of those steps. So speaking on the same thing, on your score report, you're going to see this page too that's relating to the National Merit Competition. So you'll see a selection index. I know there are so many different numbers. It's very wild. This is for juniors, right? If you're not a junior, you didn't see this. So your selection index is double the sum of your test scores. Okay. Every state has a different cutoff index. So every state has a different number that determines if you get to be a semifinalist or not. So it's changed every year. It tells you which students will move on. It usually ranges between 212 to 223, and they don't really change more than a point or two between year to year. So again, every state has a different one. I cannot tell you what your specific state is, but you can absolutely Google, Georgia 2021 National Merit Cutoff, and you should be able to find that, if not now, within the next few weeks, right? So I cannot tell you those, I'm sorry, but you can absolutely find it on the internet, if not now, again, soon. So this is how you figure out if you're getting into the scholarship competition. What's your index, and is it above your state's cutoff index, right? So that's kind of what you want to know. And again, every state is different. So that was for semifinalists, finalists, and beyond, right? For that commended level, right, that I kind of talked about earlier, that actually is a nationwide cutoff. It's a little bit different. It's not state by state, it's nationwide. Again, doesn't come with anything and you can't move on in the competition, but a great thing to have on your resume. I know that's a lot for sure. So just keep in mind, you're going to get the recording and kind of go through those again. And I'm happy to take questions at the end. Unfortunately, I can't tell you your specific state, but you can absolutely find that. You can also contact your guidance counselor, who hopefully your college counselor, and hopefully will be able to help you figure more out about that. So that's your selection index. That's what you want to look at if you're thinking you may be eligible to move on in the competition. Okay, and on the last page of that score report, you're going to see question level feedback. So this is as far as the information you're going to get. You're not going to be able to see the actual questions, like, what if x plus 3 is this, etc. But you can see kind of your patterns and things like that. So it's broken down by question, right? So you see how many questions there were, how many you got correct, how many you got incorrect, which ones you got correct too, which is really great, right? So a pink highlight, right? So you see kind of around here on 4 and 11, 12. That's an easy question that you missed, right? So perhaps you made a small, mistake there. Blue boxes, right? So these levels of 1, 2, 3, those are the difficulty levels of each question. Just keep that in mind, right? So if you're missing only three blue box questions, really difficult questions, that's a good thing, right? That's the thing, you're not making, silly mistakes or things like that early on. So this is a really cool breakdown to see. And you can also see patterns in them too, right? So we want to look for patterns in our test report, especially with time management. So if your accuracy starts to dip towards the end of the test, right? Let's say the reading section, you got all like the 10 questions at the end wrong. And that's frustrating for you because you feel like you did okay. Consider maybe you did run out of time and you were guessing. Or perhaps you're tired, right? Mental fatigue. This is really, really prevalent in the reading section, which is almost an hour long. That's most definitely a marathon there. Both of those situations can be helped with practice as you become more familiar with the test format and more familiar with the questions and things like that as well, and more confident. That'll definitely help. Other, patterns you could see there. Are you missing large blocks of the reading writing section? Perhaps there's a reading passage you had trouble with, right? Perhaps there was a historical passage you just had a lot of trouble with that specific one. That's what a block could show you there. So the PSAT and SAT, they're both really reading-centric tests, even in the math. So you probably encountered a set of paired comparison passages, a challenging science passage. Maybe that's what got you there. As a side note, talking about the ACT, if you felt that the reading on this was really difficult for you, the ACT reading is much faster. So it's kind of stretching you a little bit more that way, but it's more consistent in its difficulty level. So you're not going to get stuff from the 1800s. Something to consider there if that's an issue with you on the reading section, but it's much faster, right? It's about half the time. Okay. Math patterns, right? So generally speaking, the no calc section is actually going to make you do long form multiplication, long division, and you're going to have to do a lot of factoring by hand and things like that. So if your accuracy rate on these was low, it's worth considering brushing up on some of that stuff. And maybe thinking about you need to write out your work more. Maybe you accidentally dropped negative or you just added something up incorrectly because you were trying to go too fast, things like that. The calc section is more about modeling and functions and things like that. You're going to have a lot of word problems there, right? So if you're missing 1 or 2 block questions, perhaps you're not reading carefully enough in that section, right? perhaps you need to kind of work on taking your time in the math section and make sure you're getting all the information. I'm just going to stop for 1 second just to check the Q&A. Okay, awesome. So I have a few questions to people who, what is the eligibility score for the qualifying competition? I can't tell you that, I'm sorry. You have to look it up for each of your state. Someone said Ohio is 160. Perhaps that's possible. I'm not really sure though. I would double check that. It is usually in the 200s. Where can you see your PSAT report? That is going to be on the College Board website. So you have to log into the College Board website. If you have trouble logging in, unfortunately, I don't really know much about it, but I'm sure College Board has like a chat function or something they can help you out with. So I just want to stop and do a couple of those just to make sure. Okay, cool. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the math on the PSAT. And again, I know I'm going super fast. I'm so sorry, but I want to leave time for Q&A. Remember, there'll be a recording sent out later, so you guys can go back and look at these slides in a little more detail. So you have 3 categories of math you'll see on the PSAT. The one is heart of algebra, so that's your basic algebra stuff, algebra 1, perhaps algebra 2. You know, all that kind of stuff there, linear, graphing, equations, exponents, things like that. And they have passport to advanced math. So, you know, that's where you're going to get some more complicated things. That's where you're going to see factoring and things like that, sorry. And then problem solving and data analysis, right? So you're going to talk more about inferring things from data, maybe some more stats, some more percentages, things like that. So, you know, your score report may say you had trouble with this or that. You know, these are kind of the definitions of those. You know, that math sheet, right? So in addition to those, you will have just a couple questions at the very, like, you know, every once in a while sprinkled about on geometry and trig. If you're someone, a lot of students in the US usually take like geometry their freshman or sophomore year. So perhaps if you're a junior, it's been a little while since you took it, or even if you're a sophomore, that's okay. Just keep that in mind that there are a couple geometry and trig questions on the test. So if you're planning on taking it again or something, that may be something to brush up on. They do give you some formulas, which is really great, but there are some other things you'll need to know, such as some rules about degree measures and things like that, that you'll want to brush up on again. Okay, so that was about the test, kind of what it means on your score report, things like that. So let's talk about how the PSAT fits into the college admissions process, and we'll talk a little bit more about that process and, you know, what your next steps might be now. So to start, how important is it? For most students, it doesn't really have any direct impact. Unfortunately, you cannot send your PSAT scores to colleges. So, you know, when they require an SAT or ACT, PSATs do not count. I'm really sorry. You have to take an actual SAT. If you want to send that, they will not get it. And national merit is going to affect some students, which is really great. And they're going to receive the scholarship, or perhaps they receive semifinalist or finalist status or something. But many don't, and that's okay too. But it's a great starting point, right? You got to take a day out of school to really spend this time dedicated to practicing this. And that's really great. So it's a great practice run for the SAT, and it can tell you a lot about how you would perform on the SAT, right? It was written to pair with it. The SAT is slightly longer and slightly more difficult. You do get a general sense of what you would get on the SAT. As a note, if you were kind of in the higher end of the scoring area, it's going to be a little bit harder to pin you down on what you would get on the SAT. So you may want to think about taking one of those to get a better idea. And again, the PSAT cap taps off at 1520 and the SAT goes until 1600. Perhaps you also really hated the PSAT. Maybe it's time to consider an ACT instead. That's totally fair. So they are more similar than ever, right? At the end of the day, about 70% of the content and the skills can transfer between both of them, right? You need to be able to read and have reading comprehension. You need to be able to correct written English passages, correct the grammar. You need to be able to read graphs and interpret them, and to, do algebra, statistics, and some geometries, all that basic stuff. But the way they're presented is very different. So in the SAT, PSAT, you're going to have more advanced readings, right? We talked about how that's kind of over an hour long on the actual SAT. You may have old passages, things like that. It's going to be a little more complex. And you're also going to have more math word problems on the SAT and PSAT. That's because it's a reading-centric test, like I said, even in the math. But there's going to be very, very little geometry on it, right? So perhaps you really hated that, something to consider on the SAT. It's really algebra heavy. So the SAT and PSAT especially, you want to make sure you have taken algebra 2 by the time you take that test. That's especially going to help you out there. The ACT, on the other hand, is going to have a science section, which is unlike the SAT. It's a little bit weird. You don't really need to know the science. It's more testing your ability to interpret data. And it's going to have more advanced math. So you can't have your calculator the whole time on the ACT, but you are going to see more trig and more geometry and perhaps even questions on the unit circle and things like that towards the end. On the other hand, the ACT, right, the reading is a lot easier as far as difficulty level goes, but it's faster, right? So it's really a give and take here. If one of those things sounded really good to you, perhaps think about leaning one way or the other. If you're not sure, I really recommend just taking practices of each. And the PSAT serves as a great practice base point for thinking about the SAT. So exactly, right? You can use the PSAT to decide between these. So you could take a practice ACT, combine those PSAT scores you got and compare them with the ACT to see what's going on, right? If you're a high scorer, like we said earlier, you may want to take an SAT practice because it gets a little weird once you get to the top of the PSAT scoring range. You can compare them, right? So if your scores are different by 70 SAT points or more, or they're, drastically different one way or the other, you definitely are stronger in one of the tests. And you definitely want to lean towards that higher scoring test because it's just a much better place to start off. If you're about within 60 SAT points, it might be just a preference thing at that point, right? And so you can find these ACT, SAT conversion tables online. Just Google something like that. It's very easy to find. To kind of compare what would this be. Let's say I got a 27 on the ACT. What's that worth in SAT points? That's really easy to find online. I recommend you kind of check those out. So, perhaps you just need to pick the one you prefer, right? Perhaps you hated the PSAT with every fiber of your being. Go with the one you don't absolutely despise, right? Or, vice versa, things like that. So those are things to consider. As you're taking both of these, the best possible thing is to simply take one of each, like a practice test of each, and get an idea of what's going on with you, because every student really is different. Okay, so it's kind of, how you pick those tests, how you think about which one you want to take. So let's think about how they actually work, further down that admissions process when you're actually doing those applications. So when you're applying to colleges, there kind of two components, right? So you have quantitative components. So those are things that are number related. So your high school GPA, your SAT, ACT scores. I'm really sorry. I don't know why this is SAT subject test. Those are no longer a thing. That's totally my fault. I apologize. And so you're thinking of those numbers, things like that, right? So what are these numbers I'm sending in? Alternatively, right, you also have qualitative components that are going in combination with these. Those are your essays, your recommendations, the activities you did, right? Your interest in the school, and that can come from your essay or other things like that. Right. And so is it a cohesive story here, right? Are you someone who is strong in both? Do we see perhaps, numbers a little bit lower here, but really strong leadership and activities and really strong essays and things like that? So these are just things to consider, that those numbers are just numbers, right? There's still other things you can really add in here. So one thing to note too, SAT, ACT are accepted by all colleges. That used to not be a thing, but that was back in the early 2000s or so. So all colleges will take either without prejudice. So just keep that in mind. Go with whatever you prefer. So testing is typically a junior year activity. Some may need it earlier, while others should wait. So some students, perhaps those considering doing athletics in college, may need to have them earlier for scouting and things like that. I'll admit I'm not sporty. I don't know much about how that works, but I do know that is a common occurrence. Perhaps you need them for dual enrollment or things like that as well. That's also possible. Or AP courses, some schools work that way. They require those. That's really a school by school basis. So some sophomores may be taking an official test for any of those reasons. So even if you test sophomore year, you definitely should take another one later on in your junior or senior year, because at that point you simply had more school, right? You have more knowledge, and it's worth a try to see if your scores have gone up, right? So fall of your junior year, perhaps you're already in a more advanced math and English classes and you want to get it over with, right? Or spring of your junior year, you're an Algebra 2 junior year, right? So you want to get as much Algebra 2 done as possible, or you have other commitments in the fall or something. So keep in mind too, think about those things, right? Do you play a sport? Is it a summer sport, spring sport, fall sport, those things like that? Perhaps you're in a school musical. Do you know you're going to be taking a lot of vacations next summer? All kinds of those things. Take those into consideration, right? Make sure you have time for test prep, because it does deserve some time on its own too, right? You do need to do some practice and get ready for these tests. You can't continue to take the tests into your senior year right? So September, October, if you're applying early admission, or November, December, if you're applying regular admission. But you shouldn't wait until then to start, right? That should be a last ditch thing. Perhaps you have a 30 on your ACT, and to get a certain scholarship, you need a 31. So it's worth one more try to see if you can go in and get that scholarship money, right? Those are the kinds of things you should be doing if you're taking a test your senior year. So just keep that in mind. You should not wait until then to start. You should at least have taken an official one at some point by the end of your junior year, ideally. Just keep this in mind. Multiple test dates is also super important, right? You want to plan for multiple official tests. So kind of pick 3 and plan from there. And then, if you get one early on, you can, of course, stop there. So there's a couple reasons. Super scoring, right? So super scoring is when they kind of take your best of scores. So for example, and I'll kind of do a little example right here. Let's say you take an SAT in May, and your reading writing is, let's see, a 700. You did awesome on it. And your math is like a 550. You had a little trouble with math. That's all right. But let's say you take it again in August, right? You've been studying all summer. You kill it. Your reading and writing somehow dipped a little bit, which is frustrating. But your math, you've been studying all summer, popped up to a 650. That's awesome. So what happens is super scoring is what the test is going to do is they're going to pick your best of scores. They're going to combine that high reading writing from May and that high math from August. And that's going to be your final score, right? That's called a super score. It's your best of from all the tests you've taken. And the ACT does that as well. So that's kind of why you want to take more than one test. You don't know, right? Maybe you just do get a higher score, right? Maybe that first test you realized what you had to do and you go back and study some more and you work again. It also allows you, right? Maybe this was perfect for you, so you didn't really stress about this reading, writing the second time too. That's also possible. So super scoring is super important. That's one main reason why you want to make sure you take multiple tests. And you gain confidence, right? So, after you've actually been and done it once, it's not as intimidating. I think you get a little more confident. You also negate any scoring fluctuation. Again, these tests are all scored in little crazy ways with statisticians and things like that. Perhaps one is scored a little bit harder than the other or something like that. You just want to make sure. It also allows you to set incremental goals, right? So you need to go up 200 points. You're not pressured to go up the 200 points that first test you take. You can do it over a couple of tests and with super scoring. So you want to plan for 3, pick 3 on the schedule, and then you can stop once you reach your goal, but kind of put that there, right? So you're not surprised when you need to take another one and you have that planning in place, especially if you're a busy student, as many students are these days, sports and activities and things like that. So definitely at least 2, if not 3. Okay, there we go. And you have lots of opportunities for either of those tests, right? So you see on the bottom, all those SATs, and the top, all those ACTs. There are some months where they do both. Hopefully you should have narrowed down one. There's a couple in the summer months too. So June, July, August. If you are someone who is busy during the school year, consider those. One small note, I would not really recommend this May SAT for many students, just because if you are taking an AP class at that time, it is typically during AP exams. So if you are in AP classes, wouldn't recommend that one. If you are not, that's a great time to take it. Should be pretty empty. So just as a side note there. And of course, the PSAT is in October every year. But there is also an SAT in the same month too, which is a lot of work on them, right? So just keep in mind that the registration closes about a month before. You want to register earlier if you can, because the earlier you actually get to pick your better locations, right? So you're going to choose from drop-down locations. It's not automatically at your school. So they may offer it at your school, or they may not. You may need to go to a different school nearby. Just keep that in mind. You want to try to get your first choice location as close to your house as possible so you can get as much sleep as you can. So earlier is better here. Registration doesn't open until a certain period as well, usually about 2-ish months before the test date. So just keep that in mind. You can find all of that on both of their websites. SAT registration dates, ACT registration dates, super easy to find. So here's our recommendations for prep commitment, right? So you kind of want a 1-to-1 hours instructions to homework, right? So let's say you have a 2-hour session every week. You kind of want to aim to do about 2 hours of homework as well. You want to have 6 hours of tutoring for every test, per practice test. Most students do about 50 to 70 hours total in between homework, mock tests, and the actual tutoring sessions. So that would be a lot of tutoring, right? So it's kind of in between all those. And so you want about 10 to 12 weeks to prepare for the test as well. So, if you're taking a test in March, it's kind of time to start thinking about it now, isn't it? Take a practice test, make study plan, think about tutoring, things like that, doing some online lessons, all that kind of stuff, right? Because we don't want to load it all up at the end. We want to kind of do it well paced. We want to not stress ourselves out about this, right? And it's also about practice, right? It's kind of like sports in that way, especially the reading sections on these tests, because those reading sections are all about practice. There's strategies you can learn, which are really great, but at the end of the day, you've got to keep doing reading passages. This is kind of just a loose, right? Every student is different. Of course, this is a general recommendation. So you want to choose a destination date that works for your student, of course. So again, you see those here. And again, I'm sorry, there are no subject tests. I should have taken them off. My apologies. But think about this. Think about these kinds of timelines for your student. Of course, you can kind of think about what tests you'd like to take. A lot of these come in threes, which is kind of nice. A June, July, September ACT is super common. A March, May, June SAT is also a really common combination as well. Just keep those in mind. It's kind of nice that some of them are all really close to each other. Oops. Okay, so you can register on either of their websites, so keep that in mind. So the SAT, you can register right on the College Board website. That's where you're looking at those PSAT scores right now. The ACT is going to be at act.org. Should be pretty easy to find both of those. Keep in mind that other places can't register for you typically because it requires some sensitive information like social security number and things like that. Just keep that in mind. You will need to register yourself. Accommodations, right? So if your student has accommodations, if your student receives accommodations during their regular school day or has an IEP or things like that, you want to make sure you work with your guidance counselor at school to submit that, right? You want to make sure you get those accommodations from when you actually take your test, right? So, and that's a little bit different depending on what test you take. This is super important if you do get accommodations. If you want to do the SAT, it's really nice. The College Board actually keeps on file for you, right? So you only have to apply once, whether you've applied for an AP exam, a PSAT, or an SAT. Once you apply and get approved, it's automatically applied to all those others that you may take throughout your time in school. ACT is a little bit different. You have to reapply for every test you want to take. So let's say you want to take June and July ACT, you got to send in 2 applications. I don't know why it takes that, but that is the way it is. And it's good to know ahead of time, right? So be aware that both of these things take time to process. So don't leave these to the last minute. Make sure you're working with these early, right? And so like I said, only your school's guidance counselor can submit these. So make sure you're talking with them about that. And there's all kinds of varieties of accommodations you can get, of course. Most of the time, they'll be able to make it match whatever you're getting in school. And as a note too, colleges cannot see when you take in a test with accommodations. That is a law. There was a lawsuit about that a couple of years ago. So do not worry about that at all. Don't let that change your mind about getting those. You want to get those if you have those during your regular school day. Set realistic goals, right? So all this, what is a good score? What score do I need? Well, it depends, right? It depends on where you want to go, right? So you can use the College Board or the Appleworth site. Appleworth site is also free. College Board site is free as well to see how your scores compare to other applicants. So what you want to do, perhaps you can use those, or alternatively, let's say you're thinking of University of Georgia, which is where I went to school, and you want to search University of Georgia freshman class profile. That's the phrase, freshman class profile. That's going to give you a set of data, a set of stats on the most recently accepted freshman class at that school. That's going to tell you their GPAs, their SAT scores, other interesting things like how many countries they accepted, stuff like that, which is kind of fun. How much aid they typically got, things like that. But the biggest thing is that we're looking at those GPAs and scores. So once you're looking at those, you should find those. Most schools are just going to tell you the middle 50%. That's what you want to look at. Some may not. Some may tell you the top 25, the middle 50, the bottom 25. And again, these are quartiles, right? So a little bit of stats in there. But the biggest thing is you want to look at that middle 50. Keep in mind, a lot of those bottom 25 students, right? So the student with the lowest SAT score that was accepted is probably people like athletes or other people who got in for other reasons, whatever those may be, and are just not straight typical academic admissions. Do not rely on that to get into that school. You want to look into the middle 50, right? And you want to look more towards kind of the center-ish of that even, right? So let's say that middle 50 is between 1200 and 1400 on the SAT. You want to really aim for that 1300 at least, right? That's your goal. Of course, it doesn't mean you won't get in with something lower. I really recommend, you still apply to those schools, but that's a goal. That's how you find some of those goals for yourself. Those top 25s, maybe all kinds of other things too, like people who are applying and this is their safety school or something, or all kinds of other reasons too. People who just got a really, really excellent score. But again, the phrase is freshman class profile. That's the key phrase you want to do when you're looking for those numbers. So go in strong, right? Think about momentum, right? Spread your testing over one section, right? Don't spread it over the entire year, because you may, forget about it. It's, stretching it too long. You're stressed the whole time. You want to focus on, you saw those couple of dates we saw earlier where they're really nicely stacked, right? Like March, May, June for the SAT, or like June, July, September for the ACT. Those are nice and stacked together. Those are good choices to make, right? Where they're pretty close together. You're in the mindset, right? You're not going to lose much between each test. What you want to do too is you want to think about taking practice tests. You want to do it at least about a month before to get an actual sense of how you do, right? And then you can go there and see, what did I miss? What do I need to go over from here? What do I need to work on? All kinds of stuff like that. So you have to take those practice tests, right? You got to take those tests to figure out which one you want to take in the first place, and then to see how you're doing, right? Do a little studying. How did I improve? Things like that. You know how we talked about earlier about those patterns to see in your answers? You can see those same patterns on these practice tests as well. So lastly, I want to get to your questions. I'm super excited. I left a good amount of time for questions. Yeah, okay, good. So as a note, Appleworth does offer services. We offer SAT and ACT prep. We offer them online. We offer them in person in Atlanta and DC, New York, and Seattle. We also offer private one-on-one sessions. We offer group classes as well. So we offer a couple different types of group classes and like final review sessions, things like that. We also do AP subject prep, high school subject assistance. We do study skills and executive functioning training. So we have a new college class, LSAT, anything you think of, we probably do it. So definitely feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about prep or anything like that. And we do have a sale going on right now. So you get up to 6 free hours for a certain amount of hours purchased. And that applies to a lot of different things. It applies to test prep and academic prep. So you can definitely visit this website or call that number to learn a little bit more about it. So that's our sale that's going on. It ends December 23rd. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open this Q&A and let's talk about it. Okay. So if we pass the cutoff for the state, does that mean we are a semifinalist automatically? I don't want to say automatically because that feels very certain, but I feel like, yeah, I think you're very likely to be a semifinalist. I would contact your guidance counselor to be triple sure, but I think that's really good news for you. Congrats. Okay, North Carolina doesn't have algebra classes. It has math 1, 2, and 3. Ooh, I'm not sure. I'm guessing probably math 2 or 3 is probably equivalent to algebra 2 is my guess. Will a recording be sent to you? Absolutely, a recording will be sent to you guys at the end of this. Thank you for asking. Do I know when a pre-ACT score will come? So ACT does offer a pre-ACT, which is similar to the PSAT. I tested a month ago and haven't received it. If you tested with Appleworth, I would absolutely call us or email us at info@appleworth.com to ask about that. If you did it with the ACT, I think you would have to call them. I'm really sorry about that. Let's see. Is a score of 1240 for a freshman okay? Well, I don't know. It depends, right? I think every student has their strong suits. So also, you're a freshman. You have so much more room to grow. Don't stress too much about it, okay? I think you did great. What is the higher end of like scoring? Is that kind of what you mean? So the SAT caps off at 1600 and the ACT caps off at 36. I have a student who scored 220, but on his College Board account it says he's not a high school student, so doesn't qualify for entering that. Oh gosh, I don't know. I would absolutely call College Board first thing in the morning for that. I'm really not sure. I'm sorry. That's a little crazy. There are a bunch of charts that show the SAT scores to ACT equivalent, but they do vary some, which one's most accurate. I obviously am going to recommend Appleworth. We do have one on our website, and what you can do is you can create a free account and you can log in and you can add those scores to your account. It should be able to give you an equivalency. That's obviously the one that I use all the time. But I would look for one from a reputable company too, like us or another really large tutoring company or perhaps a nonprofit. Those are usually the most useful charts you can find. Where can you take a practice SAT test? Well, you can take one with Appleworth. We offer online tests pretty much every weekend. We won't have some for a little while because of the holidays. You can either print a test at home and take it for free, or you can pay a small fee and have a test booklet sent to you. Those are all options. If you live in one of those markets I mentioned earlier, you can, that's Atlanta, DC, New York, and Seattle. You may be able to take one in person. And there are also other sort resources too, but obviously I recommend taking an Appleworth one. You can find some other resources online though as well. For middle schoolers, can you please explain what the percentile means? Oh, yes, exactly. So I may have mentioned this in the beginning. So the percentiles, they are compared against juniors. I know it's a little bit frustrating for those of you who are not juniors, right? The percentiles are a little frustrating. So remember, higher is better. So if you did 99th percentile, you did better than 99% of people. So again, if you're a middle schooler, I would not stress about that at all. You are being compared against juniors. So do not worry too much about that one. Someone got a perfect 1520. Oh my gosh, that's awesome. We may have a National Merit Scholar on the line here, y'all. All right, can we super score the PSAT 10 and the PSAT National Merit? No, you have to, when you take that National Merit your junior year, you have to, that's it. That one testing is your score. The super scoring is for college admissions. It's a good question though. Is 1060 for a sophomore okay? I know it's good, right? I can't answer that. It depends on every student. I think you're doing great though, right? Think about, how you did right towards the end and stuff like that. So I think it's a great score, right? Think about what schools you want to go to and kind of compare from there. And remember that, are you in Algebra 2 this year? Perhaps you have a lot more to learn. Do all colleges super score only specific ones? This is a really good question. Thank you for asking this because I forgot to mention this earlier. Most colleges super score. I would look up the ones you're thinking about. Most colleges, it's like 85 to 90% of schools will super score the SAT. Weirdly, a lower number do the ACT. I have no explanation as to why, but about 70% will do the ACT or so. Again, you can find a lot of good resources online, a list of schools that super score SAT, ACT, something like that. I've seen a really good chart where it has every school and then which ones they do and which ones they don't. Very nice chart if you can find it. I know it's somewhere online. So definitely you can look that up. Again, most schools are. Just make sure you double check though. Yeah, that's awesome. Good question. Ooh, my middle schooler is at a 98th percentile in 8th grade. That's against juniors. Yes, I think you might have a genius on your hands. That's awesome. Congrats. Oh, I thought 1440 was the highest. Yes, thank you for asking about this again. So as a reminder, if you took the PSAT 8 or 9 for 8th or 9th graders, 1440 is the highest. So 1440 is the highest for 8th and 9th graders. You are correct there. 1520 is the highest for 10th and 11th graders. I know it's very confusing. Don't know why they are that way, but the thought process is that that's how much like material they're adding between those. So if you got 1440, awesome, and you're an 8th or 9th grader. Okay, is a 198 index score enough to qualify for the scholarship? It depends on every single state. You'll have to look it up, I'm sorry. You should be able to look up New York, National Merit qualifying thing. Make sure it's for this year. It may take them a couple more days for it to come out. But just you have to look it up, and you can check with your guidance counselor too. Keep that in mind. So yeah, your 1060 is sophomore. I promise it's awesome. That's great. Without studying, that's great. I love it. So right, yeah, look at that and see what you want to improve on from there. But I think that's a really great starting point. All right. How do you convert 8-9 to scores to PSAT 10 scores? It's a little bit harder, right? Theoretically, it should be the same, right? But of course, like as you get high towards the higher end of it, it's a little bit harder. That scoring scale does tend to drop off some. So PSAT 8-9 scores or PSAT 10 scores should be fairly comparable. So if you got a 1400, you should be able to get a 1400 on the PSAT 10. That's the thought process behind that. There's not a really solid comparison or conversion there though. If you want to know about higher tests, I'd recommend taking a practice SAT, like a full SAT, to get a more accurate higher score. But for the most part, they should directly compare within 10 points or so. Oops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. All right. I know you guys want to ask me if all these scores are okay, but I really don't know, right? It depends on who you are, what you've learned so far, what schools you're thinking about. Everyone is different. So, if you're concerned about if your score is okay, look at the schools you're thinking about applying to, right? Think about where you are now, which classes have you taken? Which ones do you still need to take, right? How did you feel that day? Were you having a rough day? Stuff like that, right? It's all great questions, but it just depends, right? I really can't answer those. Ooh, what is super scoring? Okay, this is great. Let's go back a slide so I have a little bit more room to draw and I'll talk about super scoring. I love this. Okay, so super scoring is where schools will kind of do a best of score situation. So let's say, and I'll do the ACT this time. Let's say you take the ACT and you take it in June. And let's say you get a, ACT has 4 sections. So in the ACT, you have, you have an English, you have a math, you have a reading, and you have a science that makes a total score, a composite. So let's say in June, this is the scores you get. Let's say you get 24 English, 22 math. So you get 18 reading and a 16 science. Let's say taking it in July and you're like, you know what? I need to improve my reading and science. My English is pretty good. Now I'm going to bump up my math if I can. Let's say your English stays at 24. Your math goes down a little bit. It is the summer. You may have lost some of your math, but you've been working on your reading and it bumps all the way up to a 23, which is killer. And you've also been working on your science to get up to a 19, right? And that's awesome. So what they're going to do is they're going to pick a best of from the selection of scores, right? So they're going to say 24 for your English, 22 for your math, 23 for your reading, and 19 for your science. Because they're picking a best of all the times you've taken that, right? And so that's why it's really important to take more than one test, right? Because let's say, again, you did really well in June on the English and math, and July you did really well in the reading and science. That does a best of score for you. And then, like I said earlier, about 80 to 85% of schools do the SAT and 70 to 75% do the ACT. I'm probably even making those percentages a little bit low. Most schools will take both though, will super score both. So do not stress too much about that. Remember that is something that you can do there. And you can definitely look up all of those schools online. Where do you see your pre-ACT scores? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so it depends on where you took it, right? If you did take this with Appleworth, you'll want to try to log into your Appleworth account. If you don't see it or something like that, feel free to call us in the morning. We're open from 9 to 5 Eastern. You can also email info@appleworth.com with questions about that if you took it with us. If you took it at your school through the official ACT, you don't have to call them, unfortunately. You don't know where our school requires all sophomores. That's probably going to be the official ACT then, yes. So you may need to log into act.org and log in there, and you should be able to see it there. If you had trouble for that, what I would do is talk to your guidance counselor as far as that goes. Yeah, so I would try logging in. If it doesn't work, talk to them or call the ACT tomorrow. Okay, Kimber, can I provide only some of my SAT results for super score? Do I need to provide all? That's a good question, right? Let's see. Let's do that scenario as well. Let's see. Oh, this kind of stuff. I like providing examples too, so this is great. So let's say on that SAT, right? So let's say May, you got 600 and 550. Let's say June, you got 660 and 580, right? So they went up both ways. What they're going to do, and this is what you don't need to worry about too much, right? Is so you obviously did better in June overall, right? So what the schools do is they don't really care. Most schools do not care except for really particular schools, typically very small liberal arts schools and perhaps some Ivies, but maybe they don't even bother too much with this. Most schools don't care. They're not going to look at your lowest scores. They're only going to look at the highest scores you send them. So don't worry too much about it unless, again, you are looking at really specific small private liberal arts colleges or perhaps some Ivies. In those situations, you can do some crazy stuff. It's a little complicated, but you can do, you can have your score like redacted almost. So what you can do is you have to, I believe you have to send in a letter still to the SAT or ACT and ask them to delete that score. It is possible, but I would not stress about it too much, again, unless you're applying to a very specific school. Okay. Okay, awesome. Okay, so my child's in 9th grade, just took the PSAT. Should he study for the pre-SAT or to take it to baseline? Oh, that's a good question. Well, I would, you know what you did for the PSAT. If you study for the PSAT, I would study for the other ones. They're kind of equal. If you didn't, then I wouldn't, right? So that's kind of my thought process there, is that you want to compare them really like equally to each other. That would be my thought with those. Can I explain the page again with the ACT, PSAT comparison? Absolutely, yeah. Let me close this and go find that page for you. I think that's great. All right, that's a really useful one. It's going to take us a minute to get there. But yeah, so you can kind of think about which one's a little bit better for you. there you go. So there's that for you to look at again. Absolutely. How do you connect your ACT account to your student account? Oh gosh, I don't know. I'm sorry. I would try to look and see if there's like a help page on the ACT website. And if not, there's probably a chat function, or you can probably call them tomorrow. So I'm sorry. I don't really know much about those websites, unfortunately. With tutoring, what's the average amount you can raise your score? Well, unfortunately, it does depend on where you're starting, right? So keep in mind, if you are starting with a higher score, it's less likely you're going to go up a lot, right? So if you're starting already really high, like a 1550, obviously you can't go up 100 points, right? There's not 100 points to go up. Typically, if you're starting with a middling score, ideally you should be able to, go up a good amount of points. Again, it depends on every student, depends on how much practice you do. I say a good goal is to go up at least 100 or so. And that's a realistic goal too, with, enough tutoring, enough practice. Not necessarily going to happen for every student, but many students who start in kind of like a middle score range and do all the work and stuff like that can go up around at least 100 or so. How much is it take each test? I believe they're both about $40 or $50 now for the official SAT and ACT. So if you are someone who has like free and reduced lunch or something at school, you can talk to your guidance counselor, and they do offer fee waivers. That's something to consider if you are someone who receives that kind of stuff. Absolutely use those resources if you have them. If you are talking about Appleworth tests, you can take them for free online if you print your test at home, or if you come in person somewhere, or you can pay a small fee. I believe it's $20 now to get a test booklet sent to you. So you have all kinds of options. If you take an SAT through College Board, how long does it take to get the scores back? So the SAT only takes about 2 weeks to get back, an official SAT, not the PSAT. So it's kind of nice, right? So if you took the one on the 4th, you should be getting it back sometime in the next week or so, I think. Maybe by the end of next weekend or so. That could be nice, right? Someone said the one before this one. Okay. This one? What do you mean this one? Okay, what are my thoughts on standardized tests like the SAT and ACT? That's a big question. Thank you for asking that. I think that they are not going away anytime soon. That's kind of where you're getting. I know some schools have gone test optional, which means that they don't require that you send in those things, but that means they still accept them. They're not test blind. I don't really know if there's any even test blind schools. People who don't accept them, don't want them, only want the other stuff. Some schools like Wake Forest, for example, I believe is test optional. That means you don't have to send it, but just keep in mind too that makes it a little harder for them to process, right, your application. Because think about this, then using University of Georgia as an example for where I went, they received I believe 29,000 applications this past year. There's simply not enough manpower to go through those. And so unfortunately what they have to do is they have to use those numbers to categorize, right? They have to say, any students who above this, anyone who's below this, we got to cut just because we simply don't have the manpower to look through all these applications. So I think they're not going away anytime soon, simply because of the logistics of the process. And I understand that, right? I understand why they're using that way. And there are, again, optional schools, but something to consider, right? They're not completely test blind. You would have to have a very exceptional rest of your application to, I think, get away with not sending a score to those schools. So it's something to consider. Also something to talk about with your guidance counselor. That's something you're thinking about because they'll know more about your specific application and things like that. But those are my thoughts on the SAT and ACT in general. Someone lives near Wake Forest. That's awesome. I'm very jealous. That sounds nice. Can I explain this page? Yeah, so someone asked me to go to this page. So this is kind of using the PSAT to think about which one you may want to take further. So, take a practice ACT. This page requires that you've taken the PSAT and then some sort of practice ACT as well, because you're going to compare those two numbers with each other. So that means what you can do, and you can kind of look online like ACT to SAT conversion scale. And so you can look at those and compare those. And this is kind of saying if they're 70 points apart, then you have a preference clearly. And if they're not, then it's more of just what you like better. I've taken the SAT 3 times. Can I only provide scores of 2 of them and still get the super score? Yes. The way I'm understanding it, yes. When you send your scores, though, it's going to send all of them. And like I said, most far and away, most colleges are just going to look at your highest ones. They're not going to stress about your lowest ones. Okay, I understand we could take 3 times for super score. You can technically take it as many times as you want. I believe the SAT caps it at something crazy like 20 times, but please don't take it 20 times. Most students honestly start to drop off after 3. You see your biggest score increase probably between your first and second, and you may see a small increase between your second and third, but after that, it's very unlikely you're going to increase by very much. Is it okay to take 3 SATs and 3 ACTs? That's interesting. Okay. So you couldn't combine them though, keep that in mind. And if you send one to the school, if you send both to the school, they're not going to look at both. They're just going to look at the first one that gets there. So you want to really focus on one, right? Pick the SAT or pick the ACT. That is your best way to go as far as that stuff goes. Okay. Okay, so any tips? I'm a sophomore who wants to take APs and start planning for my future. I don't know what to do. Oh my gosh, I know you say you're nervous to talk to your counselor, but absolutely do it. I promise that they're usually very friendly and very open. Many schools set up like yearly meetings and things like that. You don't know what you want to do. That's totally fair, right? So keep in mind that you definitely don't know you don't have to know what you want to study. You don't have to know where you want to go and stuff like that very early on. It's totally fine. Look at your grades and look at schools. Just think of a random list of schools and kind of look at them. If you start thinking about, do I want to go somewhere big or small? Do I want to study a science perhaps, or maybe something else completely, maybe like journalism or something? You don't even have to be that specific. So those are good things to think about. You want to take APs next year? That's awesome. Go for it. APs are great, right? Ask your friends maybe, which ones have you found worth it? Which ones, is it bad to take this one and this one at the same time? Stuff like that. Those are all kinds of things to do, right? And if you're nervous to do it, maybe ask like your whoever your family is, right? Ask them kind of what they think. Perhaps they can come in and have a meeting with your counselor with you too. So I know it's stressful, but it's awesome that you're thinking about it now, right? That's really important. So I would definitely think about that kind of stuff. Most states are going to have a really nice, are going to have like a college website for the state. Like for example, and unfortunately I only know about Georgia because it's where I live. They have like Georgia College 411 or something like that. So a lot of states are going to have like a main page where you can find resources about college. So your state may have something like that. If not, look at college resources, things like that. Those are all great. So you're doing well. You're thinking about it. I know you're nervous, but just do that. Fight your fear. Go in and talk to that counselor. Okay, is the only one way to take the ACT by taking practice tests, or is there a pre-ACT? There is a pre-ACT. It's not very common though. The PSAT is way more common. I would just do a practice test, honestly. The pre-ACT is kind of like the PSAT, where it's really only offered through your school typically. So yeah, I would do a practice test for that one. A little weird. Don't know why they're not the same. That's what it is. All right, I have a 4.0, taking difficult classes, but I didn't do well in the PSAT. I got nervous in the time limit. That's a great question, because it is very common. You have a good student, but a bad test taker, and that is okay, right? You may have test anxiety and things like that. And I know that's so stressful, but just remember, first of all, you are not a number, right? You are not a test number. And then secondly, too, remember that it's about practice. I know it sounds a little silly, but it's kind of like doing sports and things like that. You can tell I'm not sporty how I'm asking that, how I'm saying that question. It is about practice, right? Look at your test and think about, what did you miss, right? Are you missing the more difficult questions? Are you missing the ones towards the end? Perhaps you're nervous about, not making up time, things like that. Those are all possibilities. Think about those reading sections. Some of those are older. Perhaps did you have trouble with the older passages or the science passages, this or that, all kinds of stuff like that. So, in practice, right? So what I would recommend is taking a practice one, like at home or something, in a slightly less stressful situation, or not even timing yourself, right? Kind of getting familiar with the content itself first and the way the test is structured, and then adding that timing aspect back in. So that's what I do with a lot of my students. We focus on getting good at taking the test, and then we focus on getting faster at taking the test. That's how I typically work, again, with those students. Something to think about there, right? Also, think about having a little, like a cheap little digital watch with you on test day. They're not going to allow you to take any, smart watches or anything like that. So it's kind of a general recommendation from that, without knowing exactly what your scores and stuff are like. Normally you're very good at math, but you don't know what happens. So just keep in mind that this really word heavy math, right? It's very word problem heavy. So that's totally normal. Do not worry too much. So we're getting close to the end of our time. Thank you guys so much for being here. I'm just still going to answer questions, so don't worry. I just want to let you know, if you don't have any questions, y'all are absolutely free to go. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I know it was a lot and it was super fast, but like I said, you're going to get a recording, and I hope you at least got some of your questions or something back kind of answered. You got some more information about what's the next steps, what just happened. So if you don't have any questions, y'all are free to go. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I enjoyed talking to you guys. If you still have more questions, feel free to send them in. I'll stay around for a little bit longer answering any questions you might have. They don't allow watches at all. I don't know if they're allowed to do that. I'm not really sure about that. I'm sorry. Something to consider, maybe investigating more with your guidance counselor. They might know more about that. That's a little weird. Yes, okay, so can we super score the PSAT 10 and the NMSQT, the junior one? No, unfortunately not. You can't super score PSATs. So the PSAT is kind of that one time you take it in junior year, and that's the one that counts towards the national merit. Yeah. Okay. And like I said to you guys, we'll get a recording of this. So that is there. If you guys want to go back and look at any of these slides or anything, or kind of go over any of the other stuff. Can you take the PSAT more than once? Nope. PSAT is very strict, right? You can only take it when they offer it in October, or perhaps if you have a special case, they do a makeup, but that's like a very special situation. So the answer is no, ultimately. You can only take it once per year. So that, again, that time you take it for your junior year merit, that's it. It's just that one time. Yeah. Can you retake it? Yep, same question. So no, unfortunately not. You can take it every year, 8, 9, 10, 11, but they don't relate to each other at all, if that makes sense. Okay. Oh yeah, okay, yeah, good specification. I took it this year as a sophomore. Can I retake it as a junior? Yes. So you take it every year, right? So you take it as a sophomore, but it doesn't go towards national merit. And then you'll take it again as a junior, and that one does count towards national merit, but they don't look at what you got as a sophomore. Hopefully that makes more sense. I mean, I explained it right the first time. But yes, whenever you take it your junior year, and you will take it your junior year once, that's your national merit entry. You can't take it like more than once in your junior year though, right? So you can't take it, you don't have a second go at it essentially. Like I said, I'll stay around for a few more minutes. If y'all have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. If not, like I said, y'all are free to go. You will get a recording of the whole meeting. I love these questions. These are really great, right? It's a lot of really confusing numbers and acronyms and stuff like that. It's certainly not accessible, right? It feels really like a foreign world. So I love doing these presentations because I get to kind of help, decode some of this kind of crazy stuff they have going on. As always, your greatest resource is going to be your guidance, your college counselor at your school. I know they may seem intimidating sometimes, but I promise they're there to help you, right? Their job is to get you scholarships and stuff, right? Okay. Oh, I got a question. Okay. I go to a STEM magnet school. Everyone got a very high score. I got a 75th percentile. Everyone's asking what I got, and I feel pressure. That really stinks. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Every student's different, right? That's what I have to say about that. 75th percentile, you did better than 75% of people. You're in the top 25% of scorers. That is killer, right? So I know perhaps all of your other friends and things like that are high achievers, but you are a high achiever in a school of high achievers. That may feel really stressful, and I'm really sorry about that. Perhaps the thought behind going to that school is to kind of have that competition to help you do better, right? So I know it's a pressure, but you don't have to share what you got, right? It's no one else's business but yours. So just keep in mind, again, that's still an excellent score, right? And that, this is just for that scholarship, right? Stuff like that. When you take the SAT, you can absolutely practice and get higher. Okay, so what do you need to apply for the scholarship? This is a great question, right? So the scholarship is, you should see on the, and actually we'll go to that. When you pull up your PSAT score, you should see, it's going to be this. You should see this selection index on one of the pages when you look at that. And that's the number you got. Every state is different. So you're going to have to look up your state. So let's say, for example, I live in Georgia. I'm going to look up Georgia National Merit Scholarship Cutoff. And it's going to give me a number. And then I need to be, I'm not sure if it's at or above that number, but I need to be around that number to be eligible. And then from there, I'm not 100% sure of the exact next steps, but I would absolutely speak to your guidance counselor at school. or perhaps even call the College Board if you like, but your guidance counselor at school ideally should be reaching out to you, I'm sure, about that kind of stuff. They're able to access those scores for you. But I would definitely talk to them about that. What's an unreasonable amount of points to improve? That's a great question. I've seen it all. I've seen people go up a crazy amount of points. I've seen people not go up very much, but they've tried their hardest. That's hard. I know it's really hard. So depends on where you start to, right? So remember, if you're a high scorer, it's harder to improve. Usually mid-range scorers have the best luck improving because they are relying more on test taking skills. If you're perhaps on the lower range, you want to consider what classes have I taken so far? Am I missing a large portion of knowledge here, right? Have I not taken Algebra 2 yet? That could be a problem, right? So perhaps by taking Algebra 2, you're simply jumping yourself up 100 points that way. So like I said, most students who start around in the middle and do all the work and do, a significant amount of practice and things like that can go up around 100 points. It's not the craziest thing in the world to think about. I have seen students go up to 250. Those are specific situations, of course, though. Not saying that couldn't happen to anyone, but, those are really specific situations as well. So kind of my answer, which is a non-answer, and I'm sorry, because I've seen everything. I've seen all kinds of increases. All right. Any more questions, you guys? As I said, your college counselor, guidance counselor is always a great person. Okay, let's see. So we got some, the reading portion I did well, but the math I had trouble with, right? The reading part pulled up my total score. That's super common, right? It's okay. I'm normally very good at math, but this time I didn't study. And I haven't done a math class for 2 years because of COVID. I want to do better. So that's tough, right? So I will say, the SAT and the PSAT, their math is a little different. And what I would say, there's more reading involved. They're actually testing something called math fluency, which is a little weird. That essentially means that they're giving you these math situations and you're having to figure out what exact calculations and math to do to solve them, right? It's giving you a word problem and you have to make up your own equations and then solve the equations you just made, right? That's a little more complicated, isn't it? Some students prefer that, of course. So, think about that is kind of what's going on there. So the SAT math, the more you take it, the more familiar you get with those questions are asked. That's always better, right? So I know you said you get trouble with the math, but I recommend, looking up some practice questions online. There are tons of resources through Appleworth and through the College Board website. Pull up those, look at those math questions. The College Board did do a partnership with Khan Academy. And so they do have videos and stuff like that. On the other hand, you think you preferred straightforward math questions? Well, do I have a test for you? It's going to be the ACT. So the ACT is much more straightforward as far as their math goes. That is a big difference, right? The only thing is there's more math to know. They're going to have more geometry. They're going to have more trig. They're going to have more stats and things like that. So something to consider. There are also other things that are difficult on the ACT. So I think you said you took the pre-ACT. So think about getting those back, right? So the math is a big difference between the two tests, I will say. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that question. Happy to clarify that weird stuff about the math. So some of you guys may have felt the same way about the math, and that's why. But on the other hand, the ACT covers a lot of stuff too. Some students really hated geometry, and they really prefer the way the SAT does their math. So it just depends on every student, right? Every student's different. Okay. All right. So I am gonna do the practice test actually compared to the SAT. Great question. Absolutely. So the practice tests that you'll see through Appleworth and on the College Board website are pretty much old SATs that were actually given to people, some number of years ago, recently-ish. So yes, is my answer. Yes, they are old retired SATs. So they're a great practice test to use. So the ones you take through Appleworth and the ones on the College Board website, that's what you're gonna have going on there. So where do you access those? If you want to do it through Appleworth, you'll have to sign up for a test on the College Board website. They should be under SAT practice tests or something like that. I believe they also offer PSAT practice tests on there too. If you like to have more time on math, but you're not too strong in math, and you like more straightforward questions, which test me better. So for that one, I would consider thinking about the ACT. I feel like more straightforward math. You do get your calculator the whole time too, which is nice. But consider the ACT also does have that science section, which can be difficult. And the reading is a little bit faster too. So it's a give and take, right? That's why I say take both of them and kind of think about both of those. So where do you access? Yeah, so I just said, yeah, you can access those on the College Board website. And no worries, I love answering questions. All right, so last call for any questions y'all might have. Like I said, I've loved talking to you guys tonight. And so if you guys have any questions about Appleworth tutoring or anything like that, of course, you can always go to our website. Like we said earlier, we are having a sale right now. So I recommend taking advantage of that if you're interested. You can always buy them. If you wanted to buy tutoring, you can buy it now and use it like later if you're taking a test in July. Like the hours don't expire, so you can totally use it later. So keep that in mind. And we also have academic and AP stuff too. So I will call that. Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy I helped you with a lot of those questions. Yeah, that's awesome. As a reminder, I also teach. I'm also a tutor. So I love to get reviews and students too. So just as a reminder. All right. So that's it from me. I hope you guys have a great time. My name is Heather Meadows. Thank you so much. Yeah, so yeah, the hours don't expire. So keep that in mind too. If you wanted to buy them during the sale, you could totally use them later. I think, and you can even, I think, split them up between like your students too. So yeah. So yeah, so if you guys asking me how I spell my name, sure, yeah. That's me. What do you do during a tutoring session? So during a tutoring session, you would work through practice problems and talk about test taking strategies and things like that as well. So that's ultimately what you're doing there. Working through questions either individually with a private tutor or in a group class situation where you're doing kind of classwork and looking at practice tests and things like that. Yeah. All right. All right. Well, I hope y'all have a wonderful evening, and I enjoyed so much talking to you guys. And good luck on all your future tests. All right. Thank you guys so much.